Chapter 7. Slowly, Sarah said, "Then we are talking about a conspiracy." I hate to admit it, and I can't even begin to imagine why it's happening, but I think so. It would take more than one person to cover up any murder or disappearance, and by definition, that makes it a conspiracy. I can't think of another explanation. Who? Tucker let his breath out in a long sigh. I don't know, but if this is an organized effort, we're talking something so big and complex that it almost defies belief. It does defy belief. Think of the cost. Think of the manpower. I mean, they have to be monitoring the media, for one thing. What do you mean? Sarah, how do you think they found out about you? 6 months ago you were mugged, but there was no mention in the papers of psychic ability. It was just later, weeks ago, that the Richmond papers picked up the story. And what happened soon after? You realize you're being watched, and your house burns down, and somebody comes in the night to kill you. You mean they've got people just reading the papers looking for a mention of psychics? He nodded toward his computer, the high-tech version. Using computers and keywords, you can search through a hell of a lot of newspapers, blogs, and other social media, even in a single day. Could be an automated system. But even so, you need people to monitor, to weigh and consider what they find, and do something about it. A lot of people, assuming they don't go after one psychic at a time. It would have to represent a huge investment. So what's the payoff, she realized? Exactly. Why are they taking some psychics and killing others? What are they doing with the ones they take? What is the threat or the reward that makes these actions necessary? In other words, what the bloody hell is going on? To Sarah, the possibilities were terrifying. It was one thing to believe that an anonymous someone was after her, but to suspect that her enemy was organized on a national scale, ruthless and frighteningly efficient, and had been taking and killing psychics for more than a decade was the most chilling thing she had ever even imagined. She avoided his steady gaze and looked into her coffee cup instead, and said the first thing that came into her head: Lewis was a cop. If even cops are involved in this, if even cops are expendable, then how can we begin to fight them? We begin with information, he answered promptly. We gather the pieces and put them together until we have a complete picture, until we understand what's going on. While we're on the run from them? Tucker shrugged. We may be running from them, or running towards something that might help us understand who they are and what they're doing. We won't know until we get there. I'm still afraid that the end of this journey for me will be death. I know, he said. I think that's why you can't see where it is we're supposed to end up. You don't want to see because you're afraid you'll die there. But you won't, Sarah. Margot's fate as you saw it was changed. Your own fate as you saw it will not happen the way you saw it. We're going to change it. You're so sure of that. Positive. But I'm not. I think this is all part of the plan. We're like rats in a maze. Please, we're finding our way, and unaware that at the center there's a trap instead of cheese. Melissa Scanlon picked up the phone before it rang and said absently, "Hi, Sue, what's up?" "Don't do that," Susan DeVries ordered in a harassed voice. "I hate it when you do that. Let the phone ring at least once before you pick it up, damn it." "Sorry," Melissa said ruefully. "I usually remember, but never mind. We can't go to the dance tonight, Sue. There's weather moving in, and we have a cow out and ready to calve. Joe wants me to help him look for her. It'll probably take us hours to find her. You might at least wait for me to ask, Sue said, mild now. Bad weather? Snow, I think. You're usually right about that. Okay, I'll tell Tom. Be careful out there, Melissa. Always. Bye. Melissa glanced out the kitchen window as she pulled on her gloves. It was still calm out there, too calm. The weather service said it'd stay that way, but she knew better. It was one of the things she could predict with near 100% accuracy. The Wyoming weather. She went outside in the cold, late September air and joined her husband in the main barn, where he already had their horses saddled. Still sure? He asked, always a man of few words. Melissa nodded. Should start about dark. We only have a couple of hours to find her, Joe. Then let's move. She swung herself into the saddle, reflecting with pleasure that Joe never disbelieved her, and he never made her feel like a freak. His grandmother had had the sight, and Joe considered himself fortunate to have married a woman who also had it. They split up not far from the house, with Joe heading off to the east and Melissa going west. With bad weather coming, they couldn't spare any of the hands to help in the search. The men were already working hard to get the other stock into safer areas. Unfortunately, the particular cow that was about to calve had a habit of hiding herself away for the duration, and she was both very valuable and a favorite of Melissa's. It took Melissa half an hour to work her way out to the place where the cow had hidden last time. It was a low-lying area, thick with brush, and the worst kind of place for a cow and calf to be during a snowstorm. It was also an extremely difficult area for a horse to pick its way through. At first, that was why Melissa thought her horse was edgy, because this was a bad place to be stuck with a storm coming, and animals often seemed to know when trouble loomed in their simple lives. So when her gelding shied nervously, when the increasing wind rustled bushes nearby, she didn't worry too much about it, especially since she heard a cow bleat mournfully at about the same moment. It took her 10 more minutes to home in on the cow, and when she reached her, she was relieved that no calf was present yet. She reached for her rope and dismounted, and in a soothing voice said, "You idiot cow, what's the matter with you? You should be close to the house, not way out here with a calf and snow coming." Belatedly, she realized two things: that the gelding was backing away nervously, trailing the reins that should have made him stand still, as per his rigid and reliable training, and that the cow was tied. What the hell? Melissa took a hesitant step toward the cow, staring at the thick rope that bound her to a tree. She very obviously was not about to calve, and the scuffed ground all around her testified to her restless attempts to move away from the tree. Bait for you. She didn't know where that inner voice came from, but Melissa instantly dropped her rope and turned back toward her horse, one hand reaching for her rifle and the other for the walkie-talkie hanging from the saddle horn. She never touched either one. Her horse came back to his stable just minutes before the storm hit, wild-eyed and lathered. The missing cow also returned, but Melissa Scanlon didn't. When Tucker woke abruptly, his internal clock told him it was still well before dawn, probably 3 or 4 a.m. He had been asleep since just after midnight and had no idea what had awakened him. He listened intently for several minutes, one hand under his pillow, grasping the .45 just in case, but heard nothing to alarm him. He finally relaxed a bit, though not completely. He had the idea he'd never be able to relax completely again. What he had discovered so far about this seeming conspiracy to kill and kidnap psychics had shaken him far more than he had allowed Sarah to see. At least he hoped she hadn't seen or sensed. She needed him to be sure of himself, he thought. Her belief in fate was so strong that he had to be equally strong in insisting they could avert the future she had seen for herself, even if he wasn't sure. How in hell were they supposed to fight an enemy that was organized on a national scale? An enemy with resources they couldn't begin to match, with more manpower and undoubtedly some kind of uber-efficient communications network. An enemy ruthless enough to murder a cop and smart enough to get away with it. How could that enemy be fought? How? The fire he'd built the night before was no more than glowing embers in the rock fireplace. And he lay there on the couch watching them dim and brighten. Once awake, his mind refused to shut itself off again. He wondered whether Sarah was sleeping. After seeing all those news clippings, she hadn't had much to say, and she had kept a careful distance between them, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Or maybe the mental distance he felt was due to his own wariness. The more convinced he grew that Sarah was a genuine psychic, the more he could feel himself getting still inside and watchful. He didn't want to withdraw from her, but couldn't seem to help himself. Perhaps that out of his mind for the moment, Tucker thought of all the charlatans he had met over the years, so many of whom cheerfully plied their trade in carnivals and malls and psychic fairs around the country, and knew those people were not threatened by anything but the occasional suspicious police officer. He was certain, however, that if he had been able to meet any of the people on the growing list of dead and missing, he would have found them genuine. The fakes and phonies stood in no danger from this. People with true psychic abilities were the targets. Which meant he thought that the people behind this had some way of determining the genuine from the fake. Or did they simply watch and wait, as they had apparently watched Sarah, until they could decide? That was possible, maybe even likely. He thought of watchers all over the country, observing potential psychics, checking off items on a list until the total added up to genuine, and felt a spreading chill. Jesus, the enormity of the thing. And it was so damn inexplicable. Why psychics? Were they a threat to someone, or did their abilities make them somehow valuable? That was the question he felt needed to be answered, and it was the most elusive, because dead or missing psychics offered no answers, and as far as he could tell, nobody else had bothered to ask. He could remember reading of long ago experiments in this country and others, when it had been theorized that psychics could be used in some fashion as weapons or deterrents to weapons, but those experiments, as far as he knew, had proved worse than useless. Only a handful of genuine psychics had been able to control their abilities in any real sense, and nobody had really known what to do with them. They could not, after all, stop bullets or prevent bombs from blowing up, and their predictions had been erratic at best. But that had been back during the Cold War, when paranoia and suspicion had compelled more than one government to attempt unconventional means of attaining and maintaining power over others. Things were different now, weren't they? Tucker shifted restlessly on the couch. Whoever was killing and taking them, the list of psychics was turning into a long one. No wonder Sarah had grown so quiet. In his research so far, she was one of a much smaller list made up of psychics who had lived normal lives well into adulthood before some trauma, usually a head injury, had left them struggling to understand new and baffling abilities. That alone would have been enough of a strain for anybody without finding out she was also a target of some mysterious conspiracy. And on that smaller list of new and untried psychics, most had wound up dead in some accident within months of the birth of their new abilities. Tucker turned over onto his back and stared at the dark, beamed ceiling. Sarah was in deadly danger, and the only thing standing between her and the people who would kidnap or kill her was him. "So how are you going to stop him, Mackenzie?" he muttered aloud. He didn't know. Realizing suddenly that sleep was not going to return, he sighed and sat up, glancing toward the bedroom door automatically. He stiffened when he realized it was open. He was on his feet before he decided to be gun in hand and senses flaring. If they had snatched her right out from under his damn nose. A moment later he relaxed. One step away from the couch had brought the sliding glass doors into view, and through them he saw the moonlit deck and Sarah standing at the railing, gazing out over the lake. Tucker hesitated, then stuck the automatic into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, and shrugged into the flannel shirt he'd earlier removed. His boots were nearby, and he put those on as well before heading for the glass doors. He paused there, his hand on the handle, and for several moments studied her through the glass. She stood much as she had the first time he'd seen her, with her arms crossed over her breasts and hands moving slowly up and down her upper arms as though to warm, chilled flesh. But she hadn't been cold then, not from the weather, from something inside her, and it was the same inner chill now, he realized. Sarah wasn't cold, she was alone. For the first time he realized that for all her passive acceptance of his company, Sarah had never stopped being alone. She was as shut in herself as she had been that first day. Isolated within walls of wariness, remote in a way he didn't really understand. And inside her were thoughts and feelings and terrors she had not put into words. Perhaps had not dared put into words, but they were there, buried deeply, locked away from him and anyone else who wanted to be close to her. Looking at her, he had the sense of things moving slowly and with terrible deliberation underneath the frozen stillness, like an ocean under ice. Tucker drew a breath and opened the door, wondering how he could reach her, wondering whether he could reach her. It was chilly out on the deck, but not actually cold here at the end of September. In fact, it seemed warmer here than it had been in Richmond, and Tucker didn't bother to button his shirt as he joined Sarah at the railing. Before he could speak, she did, almost idly. "I knew when you woke up. Isn't that strange?" "Maybe not," he said slowly. "Maybe not for you." She was fully dressed in jeans and a sweater, and definitely wide awake as she glanced at him. "That makes you uneasy?" It did, as a matter of fact, but he denied it. "Of course not." Her smile, clear in the moonlight, held a twist of bitter certainty. "Oh, no? Then what about this? I'm changing, Tucker." "Changing how?" He was cautious not only because of what she was saying, but because he realized he had caught her at a raw moment when she might reveal more than she wanted to. She turned her gaze back to the lake and put her hands on the deck railing as if she needed something to hold on to. But her voice remained steady. "Whatever was born in me 6 months ago is growing, bigger, more powerful, affecting my other senses and even the way I think. I know things I shouldn't know, not because I have a vision, but just because. I feel things I don't understand and can't explain. Sarah, I'm changing. I don't know how to stop it, and I don't know what I'll be when it's over." Tucker had always assumed it would be a cool thing to see the future, and who knew it would be helpful and less painful to see one's mistakes ahead of time and have a shot at not making them. At least that was what he had always thought, but he was beginning to realize that the future might not be such a cool thing to see after all. Not when monsters lurked there. Not when all you saw was death and danger and frightening things. He had never seen anybody with haunted eyes until he had looked into Sarah's the night she'd had a vision of men coming to kill her. She never wanted to be found, that's why you couldn't. That was when he had started to believe in Sarah Gallagher. He drew a breath and kept his own voice quiet. Maybe that's natural, Sarah, for you. You mean for what I've become. I mean for who you've become, who you're becoming. How could you not change after what's happened to you? Words, she said softly, just words. They don't mean a lot to me these days. Then tell me what I can do to help you. I told you the day we met you can't help me. Sorry, I thought we'd gotten past that. Then you were wrong. She turned her head once more to look at him, and something hard and bright glittered in her eyes. You think we're safe here. We're not. They're everywhere, all around us, all the time. We're never going to be safe until it's over, and it won't be over until they get me. That's one of the things I know now. One of the things I can't explain knowing. You're wrong about Margot, he reminded her, still holding on to that evidence of fallibility. Strike one. Do I get 3 before I'm out? Her voice was tight and brittle. Tucker frowned suddenly as his own instincts and senses stirred and began talking to him. Flatly, he said, I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. She sent him a quick glance, then returned her gaze to the lake. Her profile was immobile, unrevealing. I'm not going to run away from this, he went on steadily, from you. I don't believe you're some kind of freak. I'm not afraid of you or of anything you might see. You're lying, she whispered. You are afraid of what I might see if I look inside you. He had never really been faced with a genuine psychic before. Not one like Sarah, so Tucker had not realized in all the years of his search that he would in fact be wary of one, but he was. And the only thing he knew for certain was that he couldn't lie to her about it. This is new to me too, he reminded her quietly. Give me a little time to get used to it. Time is something we don't have a lot of. Maybe. But you might at least stop trying to scare me off. I don't scare so easily. Almost inaudibly, she said, what I know would scare you, what I've seen. Tucker reached out and turned her to face him, keeping his hands on her shoulders. She felt very slight to him, and there was a tremor running through her tense body. Is she strong enough to make it through this? Sarah, we're both going to survive this, both of us. Are we? She refused to meet his eyes, keeping her gaze fixed on his chest. She sounded very tired all of a sudden, and there was something hollow in her tone that told him she was alone once more. He wondered whether she had finished grieving for her David, the dead lover Margot had been so scornful of. Had she? Was he just a memory now? Or would she torment herself for the rest of her life because she hadn't been able to save him? Are we both haunted by what we didn't do? That thought almost made him obey the urge to protect himself and pull away from her. But instead, giving in to some compulsion he didn't question, he pulled her into his arms and held her. Sarah was stiff for only a moment before she relaxed and leaned into him. Her head tucked perfectly into the curve of his neck, and her warm breath against his skin sparked a tiny flare of heat deep inside him. She felt good in his arms, almost terrifyingly delicate, but very good. Her arm slid inside the flannel shirt and around his waist, and he knew the moment when she touched the gun. She didn't react at all except to say, "You have a gun." Belatedly, he remembered she was an army brat. Guns undoubtedly were familiar to her. "I thought it might come in handy," he said. "You're probably right." One of his hands lifted to touch her hair, winding the silky strands around his fingers. "Can you handle guns?" "I never liked them much. It's just another precaution, Sarah." "I know." She drew back just enough to look up at him. He hadn't intended this to go any further than comfort, but the next thing Tucker knew, her warm, soft lips were beneath his. It was a careful, tentative kiss, without force and yet tense with the hunger he could feel growing stronger and stronger inside him, a hunger he felt in her as well. It was held rigidly under control in both of them, something he was very aware of, and that restraint made the kiss curiously more erotic. He raised his head finally, reluctant but all too aware of both her vulnerability and a bad situation that was only going to get worse. "Sarah." She reached up and touched his mouth lightly, her fingers gently stopping whatever he would have said. "I don't think either of us is going back to sleep. Why don't I go get the coffee started?" Her voice was a little husky and nakedly defenseless. After a moment, he nodded and let her go. He wanted to say something, to reassure now in a different way, but the words wouldn't come. Left alone on the deck, he stood for a few more minutes, gazing out over the lake. It was quiet and calm and peaceful. He wished he could say the same about himself. Finally, he turned and went into the cabin, where Sarah had turned on the lights and was making coffee. "You're so cautious," Kate said with a sigh. "When you've been at this a little longer, you will be too," Brody told her as he peered through the infrared binoculars. "You're also made of iron," she grumbled. "What, you only sleep on odd Thursdays? I'm beat." Brody smiled slightly, but kept the glasses trained on the small cabin on the other side of the lake. She shifted, trying to find some comfortable position on a hard and chilly ground, and sighed. "Look, we've got to approach them sooner or later, or Gallagher's going to slip right through our fingers again." "Not in the dark," Brody said flatly. "Never trust anybody who comes to you in the dark, Kate." She glanced at him curiously, but said only less than number 1001. "If you like," he met her gaze, his own a little impatient. "Damn it, I'm trying to keep you alive." "I've realized that," she said with some dignity. "Just stop treating me like a child." He looked at her a moment longer, then shook his head and returned his gaze to the cabin. "It'll be light soon." "What are we going to do about Mackenzie?" Brody's mouth tightened. "Not much we can do. He won't let us get at her without a fight." "I know that." "So, if she's made him part of the package, then he's part of the package. I doubt the world would notice the disappearance of one writer, more or less." Kate opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Brody spoke up again. "Pack up." "Yes, sir," she muttered with a small salute. Brody didn't notice. Tucker came into the great room after showering and shaving, feeling better physically, but still more than a little rattled emotionally. He didn't really know what to say to Sarah except to follow her lead and just not mention those unsettling few moments on the deck. They had both retreated, quickly and cautiously, as if from the edge of a precipice. She was frying bacon in the kitchen, and as he came to fix a cup of coffee, she said, "Tucker, what we found on your computer last night, all those dead and missing people, who could be doing it? I mean, the whole thing is so huge. Do you think it might be the government?" He understood her wary suggestion. "I know it's a pet theory of the people who believe there's a conspiracy under every bush." "I know, but..." Tucker nodded. "Yeah, but It's hard not to wonder the kind of manpower this has to involve, the cost, the sheer scope of the thing, how many organizations could handle it. Not many, I'd guess. But the government could. He smiled faintly as she turned her head to look at him. I'm one of those people who believe our beloved government couldn't keep a secret for more than 10 minutes, no matter what it involved. However, I also believe that our government entity, the entire unwieldy mass of bureaucrats stabbing each other in the back while they try to run the country, or not, as the case may be. Within that mess, there could well be considerably smaller groups, a bit better organized, and a lot better at keeping secrets. The CIA is supposed to be dandy and the FBI not half bad, and we can't discount the various branches of the military. But why would they? That's the question we need to answer. Somehow I doubt we'll be able to figure out who's doing this until we understand why it's being done. She was silent for a moment or two, then said absently, Your computer beeped a little while ago. Must be finished with the search. Before they'd gone to bed, he had set up his laptop to search a number of databanks for some of the information they sought, and then had simply closed the lid and allowed the machine to work, hoping the satellite wouldn't cut the search short. Reception up here tended to be spotty at times. Now he carried his coffee with him to the couch and sat down to open the laptop. What he saw surprised him. Email? What the hell? Sarah turned off the stove and came to look over his shoulder at the computer. There's something wrong. You have an email address, don't you? Everybody seems to these days. Yeah, it's probably one of your friends. Tucker shook his head. Sarah, this message isn't coming through a server into an email account. It's being sent directly into my system via the satellite dish and my wireless connection, even though I set the program to disconnect from the internet as soon as it had completed its task. A message being sent straight into the laptop's operating system. That is not supposed to be possible. Not only does it mean my firewall has been breached, it also means whoever did it knows where I am. After a moment, she said steadily, Then maybe we'd better see what the note says. Tucker opened the note, and it was brief. Leave the cabin now. They're coming. It could be a trick, Sarah whispered. To drive us into a trap. Tucker knew his voice was grim. We're trapped now, with our backs against the lake. Gosh, how stupid could I be? Grab your bag, Sarah. He was typing rapidly. What are you doing? Trying to find out where the note came from. Grab your bag, we're leaving. She obeyed, returning to the great room only a couple of minutes later. I'm ready. I have your bag, too. Thanks. Damn it, they've routed the call through so many proxy servers it'd take me a week to trace it. We don't have a week. He hesitated only an instant, then swore and quickly closed his computer, flipped it over, and removed the battery, severing whatever connection there was between his laptop and whoever had contacted it. Sarah was right. They were out of time. It took only a minute more to pack up the computer in its case, grab it and his other bag, and kill the lights. They slipped from the darkened cabin as quietly as possible. The car was parked nearby, and it took only seconds to stow the luggage and get moving. Tucker didn't turn on the car's lights. I know these roads, he told Sarah as she sat tensely beside him. They're like rabbit trails around here. If I can get far enough back into the woods, we may be able to slip past them. He was assuming that, as at the apartment, the enemy would come in force, possibly from several different directions at once. He thought it was poor strategy to make any kind of assumption, but knew it would be far safer to overestimate the enemy rather than underestimate them. The Mercedes purred quietly through the woods, shock sufficiently absorbing most of the bumps from a narrow and badly rutted road. But they were forced to go slowly, without headlights, as Tucker picked his way cautiously around curves and between looming trees. And they were no more than half a mile from the cabin when suddenly, ahead of them, lights stabbed blindingly through the darkness. Tucker didn't hesitate. He hit his own lights and turned the wheel hard to the right in almost the same movement. "Hang on," he told Sarah. It was in all reality hardly more than a rabbit trail, an old road so narrow that brush scraped along the sides of the Mercedes, and so uneven that the shocks didn't have a chance, especially since Tucker was driving at a reckless speed. But somehow he was able to keep the heavy car on the road around one hairpin curve after another, even at this speed and with the roar of a pursuing car behind them. Unlike all the car chases in television and the movies, no shots came from the car behind them. Hardly any sound at all, in fact. There was just that grim, steady pursuit, unceasing and unrelenting. But there was only one car behind them, as far as they could tell. "There have to be more," Sarah said. "Bet on it. If I were them, I'd take one or two more cars and circle around, try to get ahead of us. They have to figure these roads all lead to the main one, where we have to end up eventually." "Are they right?" she asked, hanging on for dear life to keep from being tossed around inside the hurtling car. "No, this road goes on for miles, all the way to the highway, and it doesn't cross another road along the way." Sarah looked back over her shoulder. "I think they're gaining on us." Her voice was remarkably calm, especially considering that she could hardly breathe for the fear clogging her throat. "In just a minute," Tucker said tensely. "I'll see what I can do about that. If memory serves, and I hope it does, our friends back there are about to get a little surprised." Memory served. It was a very easy turn to miss because it was sharp and totally unexpected. A deceptively gentle rise kept even a wary driver from realizing that there were only two choices once you reached the top. Take a punishingly sharp turn to the right, or do a swan dive into a small pond. Tucker made the turn. The car behind them didn't. Duran stood behind the cabin looking out over the lake. With the sun up now, it sparkled invitingly. He thought briefly of swimming or fishing or just drifting on a boat, but the thoughts didn't last. They never did. "Report," he said, as almost silent footsteps approached behind him. They didn't leave anything behind but a half-cooked breakfast. No sign of where they're headed next. No sign of their ultimate goal. Duran glanced over his shoulder briefly. "I imagine the ultimate goal is to escape." "Yes, sir." "Tell the others it's time we were going." "Yes, sir." Footsteps retreated. Duran returned his attention to the lake, but this time his gaze scanned beyond it. Eventually he focused on a spot directly across from the cabin, misty in the early morning. A couple of fallen trees, thick shrubs, a very peaceful scene. A perfect place from which to observe. He smiled slightly as he studied that perfect place, then, still smiling, he turned and went unhurriedly toward the cabin. "Tell me that bastard didn't know we were here," Kate pleaded. Watching several dark cars leaving the cabin across the lake, Brody laughed shortly. He knew. Kate was still visibly upset. What's he doing here? Why is he heading the hunt for Sarah Gallagher? She must have more potential than we realized. But they tried to kill her. Brody sat back and began stowing the binoculars, frowning. Maybe not. That fire could have been an attempt to get her rather than kill her. A house burns down, a female body is conveniently found inside, burned beyond recognition. Who's to say it isn't Gallagher? Kate looked a little sick. Kill some poor woman just to provide a body for something like that? It's been done before, Brody replied without emotion. After a moment, Kate drew a deep breath. So you think Duran wants her? I think he wouldn't be here on the front lines unless he had something more in mind than Gallagher's death. Kate nodded slowly. What now? Now, Brody said grimly, we find some way of getting our car out of that fucking pond.